Good evening. Welcome to Hill Alcohol and Drug Treatment Family Night. My name is Debbie Hill, and this is a continuation of our family series. And tonight's lecture is all about communication. And it's interesting because most people, grown-up people anyways, feel like we have the skills and the ability that we need to communicate effectively. But the truth of the matter is that most people lack the skills necessary to truly communicate effectively when it comes to communicating at a feeling level. So tonight's lecture really is about communicating feelings, not so much about communicating our thoughts and our ideas and our opinions. It's really about communicating at that deeper level and talking to each other about the way that we feel. And so to start that out, what I would challenge you to look at is to question yourselves about what it is that you want from your most significant relationships. Some of the things that people tell me, they report that they really want from their families or they want from their primary relationships is that they want a sense of being understood, they want a sense of belonging, they want that connectedness that we call intimacy, that they want fun, that they want respect. Respect is a biggie. They want to be understood. And my message to you is that you are not going to get the fruits and all the things that you deserve and you desire from your most intimate relationships without learning how to communicate on that feeling level more effectively. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, and the benefit of learning that skill is that you're going to enrich and enhance your relationships. I think that there are 3 key ingredients to having successful relationships. 3 key ingredients. One ingredient is the ability, this is in a committed relationship, is the ability to stay emotionally present. The ability to stay put emotionally and to work through the process of effective communication and work through listening and hearing and being 100% present on an emotional level during the difficult times. The second thing that I think is necessary for successful relationships is the ability to communicate feelings. And the third thing that I think is an absolute key ingredient is our ability to forgive, which is another lecture, so we won't go there right now. One of the things that I want to point out to you is that you are 100% responsible for 50% of your relationship. You are 100% responsible for 50% of any of your relationships. That means that you have no power or control over what that other person is giving back or how they're behaving or responding, but you do have absolute control over the choice that you make and how you will communicate and how you will behave in your relationship. 100% responsibility for that. So let's start out with tonight's lecture on talking about the importance of nonverbal communication in the communication process. Many people don't realize that 85% of our communication takes place nonverbally, takes place without a word being spoken. 85%. And so let's look at some of the ways and some of the powerful messages that we send people just through our body language and body postures and gestures and that kind of thing. How, for instance, might I communicate to someone, I am emotionally here, I am emotionally present right now, and I am interested in what you're saying? One of the ways that we can communicate that is simply through our eye contact, is simply through making contact with our eyes with that other person. The other thing that we can do, and I know this sounds like this is such a small thing, it couldn't possibly make a difference, but it does make a difference. When you're sitting or standing with the person, the way you sit or stand, what your body is doing in that space is really important and says 1,000 words. So if you are wanting to convey to that person, I'm here, I'm emotionally present, I'm listening, I'm paying attention to you, I'm open to what you're saying, one of the ways you can do that is with your body being in an open gesture, an open posture, rather than closed up. By slightly leaning forward is a way of conveying, I'm here, I'm understanding. Of course, if you do that too much, it presents, I'm aggressive and I'm about to pounce on you, rather than I'm just open and I'm present for you. The same thing is true when you're sending negative messages or messages that are conveying the idea of I'm not present, I'm not the least bit interested, and this is exactly a waste of my time. The way we send those kind of messages, again, can come through our eye contact. If I'm avoiding eye contact, if I'm looking out the window, or I'm looking at the ceiling, or I'm looking down at my shoes, or looking anywhere but at you, I'm definitely conveying the message to you of I'm really not interested and I'm really not emotionally present. Looking at my watch or looking at the clock on the wall will convey a more specific message. And that message is saying, I can't wait to get out of here. This is really a waste of my time. How much longer exactly is this going to take? Okay. So powerful messages, picking up the newspaper, somebody reading while you're trying to have a conversation, or they're really looking over here at the TV while you're trying to communicate something, really gives another message of I'm discounting you. You really are not the most important thing, and I can't really wait until you get out of the way so I can move on with what I really deem important, which may be my newspaper or the television or something along those lines. So being really aware of what your non-verbal communication is saying or not saying is really, really important. Can have a very positive impact or can have a very negative impact. A great deal of good communication is simply learning how not to have bad communication, learning how to avoid negative styles of communicating. So let's simplify that a little bit, and let me say this, and that is that I believe you can boil good communication down to something very simple, and that is that good communication happens when my intent is to learn. Good communication happens when I have the intent to learn. When I am communicating that, I am open. And good communication can only happen when individuals are open. So my intent is to learn. Whatever is going on in that moment, no matter how difficult the communication is, no matter how hard it is to listen to the feelings of another person, good communication will always happen when it's open, when there's an intent to learn. Conversely, bad communication or negative communication happens when my intent is to protect, control, and resist. This is positive, this is negative. When my intent is to protect, control, and resist, I am certainly not open. In fact, this is definitely a posture of being closed down, and effective communication is not going to happen when somebody is protective, is closed up and is resistant. Good communication can't happen at that point. Let's look a little bit, if we could, also at the ineffective expression of feelings. And if you will, we could call that the dysfunctional expression of feelings. For instance, a person that is invested and stuck in the communication style of blame, when a person is a big-time blamer and they're wanting to look all the time at there's got to be somebody to blame, who's done it kind of thing, a blamer usually has a lot of personal guilt. Somebody who is really big time into blaming. Blaming is kind of a dysfunctional expression of an individual's unresolved guilt. A person that has a lot of control issues, I'm sure none of you know anybody that has some control issues, you know, the real control freaks in your life, somebody who's invested and has a lot of issues with control. That control is the dysfunctional expression of a person's helplessness. A dysfunctional expression of an individual's sense of personal helplessness. Now, anybody knows anybody who is aggressive? You know, maybe a rager, maybe somebody that is threatening in one way or another. Aggressiveness oftentimes is an inappropriate expression of a person's fear. And somebody that is really stuck in anger, you know, maybe isn't at the point where they're threatening, but it's always that they're always teed off, they're always pissy and mad about something, everything is about being angry and annoyed. This is oftentimes expression, dysfunctional expression, when a person can't directly and appropriately express their hurt. You know, this one, this aggressiveness, is really, this is interesting. An example of this one, the expression of fear coming out as being aggressive. You know, I'm not a real aggressive person, but one day I was traveling with my family, and we were going somewhere with our horses. And so we were on this tiny country road. You know, the road that goes the back way going to Lake Skinner down Rancho California Road? It's a real tiny little road. No shoulder, really hilly, you know, scary road, really a scary road. And we're pulling 5 horses and a 30-something foot long horse trailer. And so, you know, I'm kind of on guard because we're in a big truck and it's Sunday and there's traffic. And what do we come up to? We come up to people, you know, that have the nerve on this road to be riding their bicycles in our lane, which only gives us one choice. And actually gave us 2 choices. The 2 choices was to run them over, or the other choice was to go into the other person's lane on a hill and possibly get in a crash, which, you know, I wasn't really up for on that particular Sunday. So, you know, I didn't mean to do this, and you know, I didn't have a plan to do this because this was all happening in the moment, but my window was down, and so as we drove by these people on the bicycles, I shouted. I yelled out the window at them, you know, and again, I didn't plan on doing this, but I yelled something out the window, and I think the something sounded sort of like, you know, get out of the road, stupid, or something like that, and, you know, Rocky and my daughter both kind of went, Mom, you know, well, what was that? And I kind of was left with, what was that? Because I don't normally do that. Well, you know what that was? That was a dysfunctional expression of all that fear I had. How many of you have had a child run out into the street and you grab that child and you go, you swat them on the butt and you say, don't ever run into that street again. What was that? That was in that moment. That was a dysfunctional expression of your fear. So it happens. Be aware of it. Especially be aware of it when you're in those difficult moments and somebody's doing, one of these things, blaming, controlling, being aggressive, or just being stuck in that anger. Look at, maybe they're feeling hurt. Maybe there's fear going on. Maybe they're feeling really helpless and powerless and out of control in this situation. Maybe they have a lot of guilt. Those are all possibilities. I want to say something else here, and that's that any attempt in your personal relationships to use any of this information about communication, especially during those difficult moments, during those times of conflict, any attempt to use this information is truly an act of love. I really do believe that. And it takes a lot of practice to be able to communicate during those times of conflict. I know, we do pretty well when things are smooth, but when emotions are high and something is really loaded with a lot of emotion and there's a lot of investment in it, and things are, this person's seeing it this way and this person's seeing it this way, staying constructive and using this information about communication and how to get through those difficult moments is really hard. So any attempt to use this at all is an act of love, and I just want to acknowledge that. Let's talk a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts as far as effective communicating. We've talked about the nonverbal, so now let's talk, if we could, about building some of our verbal skills in communicating. And when you're going to communicate with someone, there's generally two roles. That was 4, this is 2 roles. And those 2 roles is, generally speaking, you have the person that's doing the talking, and you have the person that is doing the listening. And of course, there will be exchanges with that, but you go from talking to listening to talking to listening. And so let's break that down, and let's talk first of all about what I believe is the more challenging of those 2 roles. And the more challenging, or the one that I think people really have the more difficult time getting really good at, is how to be a good listener. How to be a good listener. The first thing you have to do if you want to be a good listener, and if you want to develop that skill, the first thing that you have to do is, when you are in the role of being the listener, the first thing that you have to do is to not talk. Sounds simple. It's not. It's very difficult to not talk while you're in that role of being listener. It's really important that you remember those nonverbal skills that say, I'm present, I'm here, I am listening to you. So making eye contact, leaning forward, keeping your posture open instead of closed that says, I'm really not listening. Keeping it open is real important. Keeping your own talk to a minimum. And then, when the person is talking and you're doing the listening, it's real important that you be listening possibly for the feeling behind what the person is saying. Listening for the feeling behind what they are saying. So if my husband says to me, which he hasn't said this lately, so this isn't a real life thing, but if my husband was to say to me, you've been working a lot. You've been out, you're always working. You don't have any time. You're always at work. Why are you always at work? My response to that may come from a place, I already erased it, may come from that place of being controlling and resistive and protective. And I might immediately respond with trying to answer his question of why I'm always at work. Well, because I have a lot of work to do, and if I want to get nasty about it, I could say, well, somebody needs to be bringing home money and that kind of thing. We could go there, but you can see what's happening. We're going to be getting into a fight, aren't we? Well, we would be getting into a fight at that point. However, if I respond with staying open and I keep my intent is to learn, what I want to do here is I want to learn more about what they're saying, and that's my posture. That's where I'm coming from, is my intent is to learn. Then what I may do here is I'm going to be looking for feeling out what is it that's really going on. If he's saying, you've been, why are you always at work? What I might say is I might take the risk of asking the question. A good listener, asks questions. So I might take the risk of asking the question of, are you feeling neglected? Are you feeling unimportant? That may open up the conversation. That might open up our dialogue to a whole new level. And out of that new level of communicating at that feeling level of taking the risk, that's when I'm going to get into reaping the fruits of this deal, which is that emotional closeness that I long for. That's for that bonding, that's for that understanding, and it's for that enhancing and enriching our relationship. So the listener asking appropriate questions, trying to understand, trying to learn, and asking the question of, are you feeling this? Looking for the feeling that maybe at that point in time is not being expressed is really important. Or even if you're getting the feeling, mirroring that feeling back. Oh, I get it. You're feeling disappointed here. Is that right? Or I hear you feeling disappointed. Am I getting that right? That's really important. Checking out, important point, listeners, checking out, am I hearing you say this? Am I hearing this accurately? Because one of the things and one of the ways that communication can go really wrong is when I assume that I'm understanding what it is that you're saying. I make that assumption, and with that assumption, I may make this quantum leap into an area that we didn't even need to go to because it really wasn't what you were saying. So taking the time, staying open, and asking the question, is this where you're coming from? Am I understanding correctly? Or making the comment of, tell me more about that because I'm really not getting it. Help me to understand that because I'm really not getting what you're saying here. Changes the complexion, changes the atmosphere, changes the climate completely in those times of conflict and stress. That's what the listener's doing. What's the talker doing? When it comes time to be the talker, how can I express myself in a way that you're going to hear me, in a way that I might be understood, since that's the goal? If you're a talker, I would suggest, and especially in the beginning when this is kind of new stuff, new information, what I would suggest here is that you keep it real simple. And what I would suggest is that you start your sentences with the word I. That you start your sentences with the word I. And from there, you plug in your feeling. I feel blank when blank happens. Why does this formula work? I feel blank when blank happens. This formula works because it helps people to stay out of that control and resist and protect mode. See, what happens is And the majority of people use this style to communicate, especially during those difficult times. Instead of starting their sentences this way, frequently what people will do is we start our sentences, instead of with the word I, we start our sentences with the word you. And as soon as I start my sentence with the word you, something happens. And the something that happens is that the you person in this conversation starts already feeling attacked and threatened and unsafe and not understood. And so instead of listening openly with the intention to learn, the you person is switching into protect, resist, and control. See, they're not really hearing what I'm having to say because they're feeling attacked. You know, when I start my sentence with, going back to my example of the husband saying, you work too much. Why are you always at work? See, I heard the word you. And when you hear the word you switch into protect and resist instead of being open with intention to learn. So suggest that you look at that and suggest that you really make the conscious effort to not start your sentences with this, but go with what I feel. Because it's very difficult for someone to argue and defend against your feelings. It's just my feelings. Doesn't really have a whole lot right now to do with you. So you are in a safe place, and your job is just to listen. So I feel blank. So, you know, in my example, the husband could have said, I'm feeling ignored when you work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. I'm feeling left out here. I'm feeling lonely. You know, I wish we had more time together. This conversation is going to take on a whole new life when we get to being able to express our feelings in that sort of way. I'm going to make another suggestion here. And I'm going to suggest that when you are the talker, that you consider, at least for the time being, that you would consider leaving certain words out of your vocabulary completely. Leaving certain words out of your vocabulary completely. The words that I would challenge you to look at and see how often you use them and see if these words are really helping or hindering your communication. I would have you look at the word always. You always. You know, nobody always anything. So always really is an exaggeration of what the reality is, and the word always puts people immediately on the defensive. So dropping the word always, dropping the word never, you never, nobody always nevers. Does that make sense? Nobody always nevers. So eliminating that word from your vocabulary. The word should implies judgment and blame, and again will raise a person's defensive mode, will raise that tendency to want to protect and control and resist. So eliminating the word should is a good one. Another good one that's kind of gotten a little bit popular is the whatever. You know, the one that goes, whatever, whatever. That really is a way of saying, basically, screw you, whatever. You know, it's a way of saying I really don't care. It's, you know, really, I don't even care enough to have an opinion on this, whatever. You know, that's a way of really shutting off the communication and really shutting it down. So those are some words that I'd like you to look at and question. The other one is yeah, but. Yeah, but, you know, negates everything that you're going to say after that, and it negates what the person has just said. And so if the person tells me, you know, I feel lonely because you're working 6 days a week, and I'm feeling left out of your life. If they just open up to me and share that with me, and my response to that is, yeah, but, da-da-da-da, I've just negated their opening up. I've just stepped right on top of that and said, you know what, I didn't hear you at all. If you say, yeah, but understand that you're taking away, you're telling the person, I haven't really heard you, and I'm just going to walk over you with whatever is going to follow my but, the word but. So understand that's what happens there, and I'd encourage you to leave that out. If you must use it, if it's just so much a part of your vocabulary, at least maybe what you can do is substitute the word and for the but and say yeah and, because somehow it adds a different flavor than the yeah but. It's not as invalidating. Okay? So these are some tips that I encourage you to use. One of the things about communicating at a feeling level is that, and I know most of my lectures, we always get to that F word about feelings, so we're going to go there one more time. And since I'm encouraging you to communicate feelings and to welcome the feelings, let's talk a little bit about some of the truth about feelings and some of the myths about feelings. Here's some of the truths that I would like you to look at when it comes to feelings. These are just facts about feelings. One of the facts about feelings is that all of your feelings, no matter how powerful, no matter how strange they seem, and in early recovery, substances numb a person's feelings. I believe that when you are really caught up in all of that codependency stuff and you're trying so hard to control everything, that addiction to control also will numb feelings. And so when people get into recovery early on, everything is sort of shut down. All of the feelings are on the frozen side. And so what happens in early recovery is that those frozen feelings will begin to thaw. And sometimes in that thawing process, because we're not used to feeling our feelings, the feelings can seem just really large and really overwhelming. And, people think sometimes, like, I think I'm going crazy, I think I'm going nuts. Hear that a lot in early recovery. Guess what? Chances are, you're not going crazy here. You're just having just a swamping of a lot of powerful feelings. And all of your feelings are normal. And all of your feelings are okay. There is no feeling that you have had as a human being that somebody else hasn't also experienced. All of your feelings are normal, and all of your feelings are okay. Now, this is maybe a novel concept to some of you, but you can express your feelings. You can express all of your feelings in a constructive way. You can experience all of your feelings without having to act on them. You can experience all of your emotions without having to act on them. You can experience the depth of your anger. You can experience the depth of your hurt. You can experience all of that without necessarily having to act on those feelings. You can feel like you want to chop somebody's head off, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you have to go and do. So you can experience your feelings without acting on them. This is another one for you, and I love this one. This is one of my personal favorites. When it comes to feelings, you do have the right and you do have the responsibility in your primary significant relationships to tell the truth about the way you feel. You have the right and you have the responsibility in your primary relationships to tell the truth about the way you feel. And I'll add on to that, you have the right and the responsibility to tell the truth about the way you feel if you do not intentionally want to hurt someone with that. If the intent with that is you want to hurt someone, you don't have that right. But you do have the right to tell the truth if your intention is not to cause harm to somebody else. Okay, and the last one is this truth. And this is the truth, and this is a concept that's going to help you a great deal in your recovery process, especially early on. This is a promise. If you change your behavior, your feelings will follow. Change your behavior, and the feelings will follow. And what that means is that, see, a lot of times people have that backwards. A lot of times what happens is we wait until we feel differently about something, with the belief being, when I feel differently, I'll act differently. And we can wait a whole lifetime waiting to change because we're waiting to want to do that new behavior. But it doesn't happen that way. We have to push through our personal resistance. And when we push through that resistance and we do that behavior for a certain period of time, our feelings will begin to change. See, if I'm new in recovery and I'm waiting for the feeling of, I'm going to wait to go to some of those 12-step meetings until I feel like I want to, you're going to be waiting a long time, because it's not natural in the beginning to want to go to a whole lot of meetings. But that's something that we hope that you're going to start to do, and you're going to push through your resistance to do that, because you're going to get to that point where it's no longer a have to do, it's a want to do. Another thing that I have, another story to demonstrate this is the story of my treadmill. I bet some of you have some of that exercise equipment at home, and you're probably waiting until you feel like getting on it. I had that treadmill. My husband got me that treadmill for my birthday because I thought, when it gets here, I'm going to want to do it. Well, I did for about a week. Then I didn't want to do it anymore. And, people that exercise regularly told me, just get on there and go. Pretty soon you're going to want to do it. Pretty soon it's going to, you're not going to feel good if you don't get on the treadmill, if you don't exercise. But you have to start. You have to start out by doing it, pushing through that resistance, And every day I'd look at that treadmill, and every week it got a little dustier and a little dustier, because I was waiting for the morning that I was going to wake up and say, good morning, treadmill, I really want to get on you and really work up a sweat this morning. Well, I waited. I think that thing sat in my house for about 2 years, and all it really did for me was remind me of the fact that I wasn't exercising, and I felt a lot of guilt about it. So something needed to change. Either I needed to change the behavior and get on the treadmill and trust the process that the feelings would follow, or I needed to get rid of the treadmill. And guess which one I did? I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to let you guess which one I did. Okay. That is the lecture for today. That is my conclusion of the lecture on communication. Again, remember that any act to use any of this stuff, any part of the time, is truly an act of love. And I wish you well, and thank you for your attention.